From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. It's Friday, which means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable. We will get you up to date on the news that made headlines this last week. And today, our panel includes Kevin Richer, senior reporter and blogger with Idaho Education News, Emma Epperly with Idaho Education News, Sarah Cutler, a reporter with the Idaho Statesman, and our very own George Prentice, reporter and host of Morning Edition with Boise State Public Radio News. But today, we are beginning with ProPublica reporter Audrey Dutton. Audrey, welcome back to the show.
Gemma,
and
thanks for having
Audrey,
me.
You are more than welcome. So Audrey, I want to talk about in the next couple of minutes about an in-depth article that you recently wrote. And so just to give people a preface on this, just a couple of weeks after creating a $50 million tax credit to help Idaho families pay for private school tuition or homeschooling, our legislature actually shuttered a program that had been helping tens of thousands of public school students in our state by paying for things like laptops and school supplies, even tutoring and other educational expenses. So, Audrey, let's start here. Refresh our memories on this new school choice voucher bill that was passed earlier this year in the Idaho legislature.
Yeah, so the parental choice tax credit, $50 million program that was passed in this last session. Some describe it as kind of a variation on private school vouchers where you can use money to pay for education wherever you want your child to receive it. So this tax credit allows private and homeschool families to reduce their tax debt by $5,000 per child per year, or $7,500 per student with disabilities, or, they can get that much money back if they don't owe that much in taxes. It's a refundable tax credit. Lower income families have priority in this program, at least in theory, and there's no limit on how many students a family can claim a tax credit for. The law says that funds need to go to basically traditional academic expenses, plus a few other costs like transportation to and from. There's no proof required or testing required to make sure that it's being used for that, except in the case of a tax audit. And then there's no testing to make sure a student is getting a quality education.
And Audrey, my understanding is, even though you said that priority will go to lower income families, that doesn't mean necessarily that people who already have their children in private school, people who already are not lower income, could not apply for this tax credit.
Right. Anyone's going to be able to apply for it. And the mechanics of it are a little bit more complicated as far as how the funds are parceled out. But ProPublica has done a lot of reporting, and as have many other news outlets, and looked at numerous studies to see how school choice is actually applied. And what ProPublica has found is when states like in Arizona steer public funds to private schools, the well-off families tend to benefit more than those who are in the lower income brackets, partly because the cost of private education is much higher, and then there are also other barriers to entry for it. And the money tends to go to families that have already made their school choice. They've already chosen private schools.
Right. They're already in that system.
Right.
So now tell us about the Empowering Parents program. First, what it was and when was it created, Audrey? And really, what was it doing?
Yeah, so Empowering Parents it's called a micro grant program. It originated sort of from the pandemic when parents needed help to educate their students at home. There was a lot of turmoil there, and it started out being federally funded, kind of transitioned over time. State officials liked it so much, basically, that they renewed it and made it quote unquote permanent. Over the past few years, I found multiple references to it being made permanent. And it was open to all students. State data showed the overwhelming majority of the money was going to public school students. And the way it was set up was that you could get up to $1,000 per student. Lower income families got first dibs. They were in the first waves. And then there was a family limit of $3,000. So if you had five students, you would still only get $3,000. And that was funded at $30 million total.
Okay, so the empowering program parents program, as you mentioned, was funded at $30 million. And then something interesting happened. Our state's most prominent conservative group kind of drew this line directly to get rid of this program, and basically saying, let's take that money and use it for this new voucher program. Talk to us about this, Audrey. Is that correct? And how I read that?
That's right. And the legislator who sponsored the bill to repeal empowering parents, we can get to that a little bit later, but
Mm-hmm.
that was not her intention. It wasn't to take this $30 million dollars and put it into a pot for this $50 million voucher program, which, by the way, is I don't know if I said already, but it's off limits to public school students, whereas empowering parents had been predominantly used by public school students.
Uh-huh.
But the Idaho Freedom Foundation said, they rated this bill and they gave it a score, and they said, this is good, in part because the quote, currently the Idaho Parental Choice Tax Credit has enough funds for roughly 10,000 applicants, which would cover about half of the existing private school population. An additional 30 million, here they're referring to the cut to empowering parents, would provide enough funds for 6,000 more applicants. So they are seeing a direct, move the money from here and we can use it over here.
Okay, so with that said, as you mentioned, you did speak with the legislator who sponsored the bill to end empowering parents. She said to you, that was not my intention. So tell us what her reasoning was behind pushing to end the empowering parents program.
Yeah, she had a couple of kind of reasons for wanting to end it. One, she didn't think that it was the proper role of government to provide grants of this kind. Two, she felt like it was being used as a technology slush fund, because the vast majority of the money, well, the majority of the money was going to
Hmm.
electronics, computers,
Hmm.
laptops, and tablets. And she didn't think that that was how it had been intended originally to be used.
Okay, here's what I find interesting about this, though. When the bill was first proposed back in 2022, one of the major reasons was to be used for technology.
That's right. Yeah, and this is kind of where I'm a little confused on you know, what what the disconnect was there, and
Uh
I'm
huh.
not sure I really got to the bottom of where that disconnect comes from. But when it was first proposed, on the floor, um, both chambers, they were talking about, here's where we have the ability to help put lower income students on equal footing with their peers who have laptops at home and have printers at home, and anymore, technology is kind of a requirement for schools. And as it was being rolled out and promoted by the governor and other folks, they pointed to laptops and technology as one of the key uses for this program.
Hmm. Well, in fact, you spoke with one mom who talked specifically about what she was able to do with the Empowering Parents program by getting her child a computer. And I want you to talk about this a little bit, Audrey, because I think sometimes there is a disconnect in how school looked when we all went to school and how
Right.
school looks now. Um, Everything, I mean, almost everything my kids do in school is linked to some type of need for a computer, and not just a need for a computer in school, but their homework. I mean, I really want people to understand what school looks like now. And if you don't have access to this at home, how this plays out. And this mom you talked to spoke about that.
Yeah, I talked with several parents for whom, having home internet was an expense. Some of these folks were single parents with multiple children. Having home internet was an expense that they had to be careful with budgeting for, and this helped them pay for that. Or having a laptop at home or a printer. And what was interesting is one parent, Deborah Whiteley, said she had used it for home internet and a printer for her 12-year-old daughter who's in public school. She said her daughter, and this is something that I heard from multiple parents, her daughter had resisted doing projects that needed pictures or graphs in the presentation because she was having to turn them in hand done, hand
Hmm.
drawn, and she was embarrassed about it. And mom didn't realize that her daughter was embarrassed to turn in these things that didn't look quite as polished as her peers with printers. And once she got a printer, she was excited about it, about doing this schoolwork.
Right. And I think that that's just something to point out to people is that, look, we all turned in hand done graphs and everything because we didn't have computers and printer. I mean, that wasn't, at least when I was going to school, that wasn't part of it. That is, that is what the majority of students are doing nowadays. And so if a child doesn't have access to that, it can be just like what this mom said, where she didn't realize that her daughter was embarrassed, and that has such, I mean, there are just so many domino effects to that, Audrey.
Right, right. Yeah. Being excited about education is kind of what it's all about for students. And that's maybe a whole other conversation, but
Oh, right, right. Well, as I want to get back to the original bill, then back in 2022 with the Empowering Parents bill, and the fact that the original sponsor of that bill, when she put right in the top part of it, one of the major reasons was for technology. She then voted in favor of defunding this bill this session. Is that correct?
right. And she didn't respond to a request for comment, so I'm not sure really what the rationale was there either, but she did vote to repeal the program.
And how about the governor? I'm curious about him signing this into law and defunding the Empowering Parents program because he has been a staunch supporter of public schools and for students having everything that they need in order to be successful. So, what was his reasoning for signing this into law and defunding this program?
Yeah, he had been, touting it up until just right before the legislative session began, and he sent a letter. He sent a transmittal letter to kind of explain his reasoning to legislators, explaining his decision to sign the bill. And he said he was proud of the positive outcomes from the program, but quote, now that the pandemic is squarely in the rearview mirror and students have long been back in school, I agree with the legislature that this program served its purpose.
Hmm.
Again, that's a change within a few months. So,
Yeah.
but that's the explanation that we have.
What have school administrators said about the defunding of this program and what that could potentially look like for students? And I'm thinking in particular lower income students, Audrey, in
Hmm.
rural areas, students in rural
Yeah.
areas who don't have access to anything but public school.
Right. Yeah. So Jason Seavey, he is the chair of a rural public school district board, Marsting, and he's also the president-elect of the Idaho School Boards Association. And he was on basically a committee that helped advise the Empowering Parents program. He was very excited about the program because a lot of the students in his school district don't have the ability to necessarily pay for this stuff themselves. And he is now concerned because his students who use this grant no longer have access to it, but they also don't have the ability to use the parental choice tax credit because there are not private schools abounding in Marsing. And it's quite a drive for them to get to a private school. And some of the private schools are not, able to serve many of his students. So he was really saddened when this program was
Mhm.
repealed.
Well, Audrey, really appreciate your reporting on this and taking time to talk with us. Kevin, two parents have filed a $50 million tort claim against the Boise School District. Can you tell us about this claim?
Yeah, Gemma, it's the latest development in a really unsettling story that's been unfolding in the
Hmm.
Boise School District. Um, the parents are saying that that their child was subject of child pornography, that pictures of the child may have been taken in school. And this goes back to the case of Gavin Snow, who had been a special education assistant in the Boise School District until January, when Snow took his own life as Boise police were attempting to arrest him on charges of child sexual abuse. Since then, the Boise district has said that Snow engaged in what they call multiple instances of inappropriate behavior with at least one student at Valley View Elementary School. And the parents who filed this tort claim are the parents of a student at Valley View Elementary School. Now, a tort claim, you need to remember, is not...
Yeah, tell us what a tort claim is.
It's not a civil suit. It is a precursor to a civil suit. And basically what you're doing with a tort claim is saying that you could seek civil damages against a public entity, and that gives the entity some time to respond.
So, Kevin, has the district said
$50 million
anything?
in damages.
Okay, so has the school district said anything about this tort claim that was filed?
They're not commenting on the claim itself, Gemma, but they are going back to comments that they've made and public statements that they've made in April about Gavin Snow and about the case in Valley View. And the district has publicly apologized to parents and to staff at the school. They've acknowledged, like I said, that there have been multiple instances of inappropriate behavior at Valley View, and instituted a variety of changes and a number of policy changes at both the school level and the district level. And a lot of those changes really do go back to and really do tie into issues that have been raised in the tort claim. For example, they are saying that special education staff can no longer have cell phones with them while they are helping a student in the bathroom. The district is going to require that two staffers are with a special education student in a bathroom. A bunch of other policy changes, and a lot of it, like I say, it really goes back to issues that were raised in the tort claim, and the tort claim was just filed middle of last month, April 14th.
So with all this said, Kevin, the likelihood is that we will see a civil suit against the Boise School District.
Like I say, that's where a tort claim leads to quite often. It's often a prelude to a civil suit, and to this point, there has been no suit filed. Yeah,
well, as you said, really quite disturbing case. If you want to read more in depth, do go to idahoednews.com. Kevin has the full story there. George, the United States is in a trade war with China. We all know this. You recently sat down with a professor at Boise State to talk about the impacts of this, and talk to us about the takeaway you had when it came to how this is actually impacting college students right here in Idaho.
Indeed. The professor is Dr. Jim Crows, Boise State professor, expert on supply chain economics. I think it's fair to say that a lot of us became mini experts on supply chains at the height of the pandemic. Remember those pictures of those shipping containers backed up at the port of Los Angeles? Well, now that same port is saying there's probably going to be a 20 to 40% drop in shipments this year because of the trade war. Well, Dr. Jim Crows teaches the next generation of experts on supply chains. His MBA students at the Micron Business and Economics School. And so we were talking a lot about that and the impact and how it hits home and the grocery shelves, et cetera. But then he surprised me when he said, and I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised, he said, well, we're graduating our seniors in a couple of weeks, and our top students aren't finding jobs because of this. And
did he go on further to say why, George? I was frankly surprised by that, because I was like, wait a minute, how do I make that connection?
So imagine who these students are. They are the cream of the crop and headhunters and top recruiters from some of the top companies, not only here in southern Idaho, but from across the country, usually visit the Micron building about this time of year, and they snap up these students almost every year. And he said and this is a quote, many companies are imposing hiring freezes, companies that have consistently hired our students upon graduation in the past. And it's pretty tough for him to see these students who have worked so hard and are now graduating into a very uncertain job market. And Gemma, here's the irony. These are the very people that would help a company navigate the troubled waters of problems in supply chains. So talk about a rabbit hole. But a number of these students, he said, they're not getting the jobs. And as recent as maybe even a year or two ago, they were almost guaranteed jobs.
Right. So once again, this domino effect.
Yeah.
You're saying. Thanks for that update, George. Sarah, I want to bring you into the conversation. So last week during our Reporter Roundtable, we had Clark Corbin on, and he discussed the governor's executive order around forest management. So I want to talk now about a report that you did. And this is in particular about one neighborhood in Boise that's trying to mitigate wildfire. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yes, I think wildfire is top of mind for folks as we move towards the summer months. So this week I was covering the Boise Mesa neighborhood, which has spent the last few years basically taking wildfire evacuation safety into its own hands as a neighborhood, ever since a close call that it had in 2016. When the Table Rock fire came very close to the neighborhood and residents were caught unprepared. So since then, the neighborhood has spent years developing a pod system, basically dividing the neighborhood into small groups of 15 or fewer homes with a captain in each one to disseminate information, make sure people are ready to go in the case of an emergency. And last August, this culminated in a full evacuation drill that the neighborhood did with the Boise Fire Department and other first responders. And the point of the drills is, basically to help residents think through everything they would need to evacuate. And so one of the organizers said he didn't realize until the drill that he needed to bring a litter box for his cat if he leaves.
Oh,
but the residents are, also hoping that there are other efforts in terms of mitigation, like cutting back vegetation on the edge of the neighborhood, things like that. It would also help them be able to continue to buy affordable property insurance, because that's been sort of a related concern in recent months, that with all the wildfires, some carriers are pulling out of parts of the state that they think are too risky. So these homeowners are hoping they can show that they're prepared and avoid losing coverage. And the last thing I'll say is just that I've heard that the Boise Fire Department is hoping to expand on these kinds of neighborhood-led efforts, especially for neighborhoods up against the foothills. After the LA fires in January, it seems like people are really seeing the writing on the wall of what could be headed our way, even in a city.
Well, and with that said, Sarah, I mean, this is specifically about the Mesa, and we should note for folks who aren't familiar with that area, definitely, up in the foothills, but also there aren't a lot of evacuation routes out of that neighborhood. So what did you talk to residents about that? I mean, what I'm thinking is, doing this drill, it's like, okay, well, now at least how to evacuate your neighborhood.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that was one of the key concerns they brought up, is that, again, they got lucky in 2016, but one of the organizers really looked around, as you said, and realized we would have been in really bad shape. But at that time, I believe he said there was only one route out of that neighborhood. Now there are maybe 2 or 3 total. But I think a big part of the hope with the drills is that if it's sort of all happening in an automatic and orderly way, that you won't have a panic and people will all be able to take those limited routes out safely.
I appreciate that update. Really good information, Sarah. Emma, the superintendent of public instruction, Debbie Critchfield, has recently been on a post-legislative tour. What I found interesting about your article about this is what she is saying people are talking about with her. And she said, basically, it's misinformation and attacks on public education that are really taking center stage of these discussions. Can you talk to us about what she meant about that?
Yeah, so yesterday was the superintendent's first stop on her post-legislative session tour at the University of Idaho, and today she's in Coeur d'Alene. And so really, these conversations are centered around what happened during the legislative session and how is that going to impact school districts and superintendents who have to file paperwork or send out memos to their staff, those kinds of things. But what kept coming up, and what Superintendent Critchfield kind of opened conversation to at the end of the session, was just attacks on public education and misinformation that have really permeated discussions with the public, things that teachers are facing. And the superintendents in attendance were really eager to talk about that. One superintendent brought up a rumor that I think a lot of people have heard, that there are in some school districts students using litter boxes, which sounds kind of crazy. And that's what the superintendent out in the Mountain View School District said, is that these types of rumors, which are not true, there's no evidence that that's happening. It'd be illegal in Idaho. Just sow distrust in public education and really cause problems for teachers. And she tied that to elections. If parents are losing faith in their local school districts, that impacts running levies, bonds, school board races, all of those things for school districts.
I find it very fascinating. So she's going to continue these stops, and again, Idaho Ed News has Emma's story on here, but also where she will be heading next if you have an interest in that. So George, we're about really less than a month away from most public pools in our state opening for the summer. However, let's talk about a new law that will take effect July 1 and how this will impact health inspections at these pools.
Indeed. And the question to be posed is, who thinks it's a good idea to have Idaho's health districts stop inspecting our public pools? But that's what's going to happen July 1st, because that's what is deep inside House Bill 202, which was passed nearly unanimously in the Idaho House and Senate and signed into law by the governor. So deep into this bill, and it's one of these really big, mind-numbing bills. It's a health bill that included everything from air quality, even juvenile justice is in there too. But deep inside this bill, there's a section, specifically section 56-10033C, and it's talking about the enforcement of minimum standards of health, safety, and public swimming pools, minimum standards, and to have them inspected. Anyway, the bill has that completely crossed out. There is not a replacement of that. They didn't change the wording. They ended this. And to the person, every lawmaker that I spoke to basically said, yeah, we kind of really didn't see that because there was a lot in this bill that was crossed out, clawed back, et cetera. But bottom line, this ends health districts from going to all of these public pools, scores of them all across the Gem State. And so we spoke to Russ Duke, the director of Central District Health, which services Ada, Boise, Elmore, and Valley counties.
There wasn't really much, well, or not at all, communication with our pool owners and operators, because when we reached out to them after the law passed saying, hey, here's what's going on, none of them were even aware of it. So it was, not an ideal approach. If you're going to make policy, I would have thought that there would have been conversations with the Idaho Association of Cities, where most of these currently regulated pools are, or bring the Parks and Rec directors and others together and kind of talk through this, because it's left us in a spot of scrambling to figure out what to do now in a relatively short period of time.
So think of this, Gemma. Indeed, there's cities like Boise, which may have the infrastructure to start up their own inspections, but there's a lot of rural communities with pools that don't have anything like this. And when the health districts went out to these rural counties and said, hey, guess what? Beginning July 1st, we're not going to inspect your pools. A lot of these county commissioners are like, hold it, what? And when we spoke to Senator Melissa Wintrow, who was, by the way, the only lawmaker who voted against this bill, she said, yeah, we get a lot of these bills and most of us don't read them. And it's like, hold it, what? What? But I guess we shouldn't be surprised, but still, it is rather stunning.
So, George, one of the things that I kind of surprised me was one of the sponsors of the bill, Senator Julie Van Orden,
Yeah.
told fellow legislators back in March that big swimming pools in communities just aren't being built that much anymore. There's actually one being built in her community in Pocatello.
Yeah, that's just not true.
So many people use public pools.
As recent as the last couple of years, public pools have or are being built or remodeled in Boise, Caldwell, Cascade, up in Orofino, and like you said, over in Pocatello. There are so many pools around here. And Senator Van Orden even went on to say, well, most people swim in private pools. And, that's a little elitist. But by the way, as for private pools, the legislature stopped inspecting of private pools back in 2002. And they even stopped inspecting hot tubs. And need we remind anyone, the Idaho Statesman reported in 2023 that there was an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease at a hot tub that sent one person to the ICU for 8 days. So, yeah, so this is what we're facing. By the way, here's July 1st, and Russ Duke said, yeah, we're going to try to inspect these as quick as we can, certainly before July 1st. But there's one thing to do this story and just shock people, and a number of people, believe me, a lot of people are commenting online about this story, and some people are interpreting and saying, well, the city of Boise can do their own testing. Well, the city actually just tests the quality of the water. They haven't been doing health inspections. As a matter of fact, the head of Parks and Rec even told us, I think we'd like Central District Health to continue to do this for them. But to do that, then the city has to create its own laws and standards. But do you want separate set of standards in every community across the state? This is a problem. And indeed, next year the legislature may come back and reverse this, et cetera. But in the meantime, tens of thousands of kids are going to jump into the pool. And what are you to think if you're a parent?
Okay, so George, really quickly before we wrap this part up, this is what I want. I think that's important to understand is what you just said was that these municipalities test the water quality. So we're talking like the pH balance, all of that. This is so what will be going away are these health inspections. So I'm thinking about things like the public bathrooms that are parts of the, you go into the locker rooms, right? Before you walk out into the public pools. So you're talking about none of that being inspected. Some of these have little food stands. None of that will be inspected.
These inspections have been done specifically by the health districts all across Idaho. They have not been done by communities, certainly rural communities. And so if they're going to do it, number one, they're going to have to pay to do it. Number two, they're going to have to write new standards.
Okay. Appreciate that, George. I'm sure we'll be talking more about this as we get into the summer. Kevin, this past week, there has been a lot of discussion about President Trump's first 100 days in office. I'm curious about what those first 100 days have looked like in terms of education. And you recently wrote about this. Can you tell us more?
Well, like I wrote, they were first 100 days were predictable, but they're also very exhausting. I mean, President Trump basically foreshadowed just about everything that he wanted to do in education as a candidate. He talked a lot about trying to get rid of the Department of Education. He talked about trying to advance school choice. He definitely talked a lot about culture wars and about transgender athletics and about DEI. None of this should come as any surprise. And a lot of these policy priorities of the president are in line with a lot of the policy priorities that we see in education in Idaho. So all of that is predictable enough. But the pace of it and the churn that we're seeing in terms of backlash and litigation, it feels like it's a news story every day coming from the White House on education topics. It's been a very busy 100 days, and I think it's just going to continue. We're going to be in this what's usually a legislative off session for us and an off season. It's going to be really busy the next few months figuring out what's happening at the federal level and what it might mean for Idaho.
And Kevin, in the piece, you wrote that that the Trump administration is kind of blurring the lines between federal and state policy. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, I think what's interesting here is that the president has talked a lot about trying to move education policy back to the states. I mean, that's kind of the hallmark of his push to get rid of the Department of Education, the federal Department of Education, to allow states to take charge more in state education policy, to craft education policy at the state level as opposed to having it handed down from the federal level. But a lot of what's being handed down from the feds are fairly far-reaching. I mean, the executive orders that we're seeing in terms of transgender athletics, the attempt that the White House has made to make sure that they defund schools that are spending any federal dollars on DEI. Those are pretty far-reaching proposals coming from the federal level.
One of the areas where we've seen impacted are our students, college students on international student visas. You recently reported on this. Tell us about these 5 international students who here in Idaho who had their visas revoked and now they have them back.
Yeah, so a lot of people have probably heard of these kind of higher profile visa revocations nationally. They kind of started with students who'd participated in Palestine protests. But then they started to get more, it was more difficult to figure out why specific students were targeted with a visa revocation. For some students, it was as simple as having like a traffic ticket. For the students in Idaho, there were 4 students at the University of Idaho and 1 student at the College of Idaho that had their visas revoked or documents related to their visas. And we don't know why any of those revocations happened. The University of Idaho said that they learned of those revocations by monitoring the Student Exchange Visitor Program, or SEVIS, website. And so that's how they learned of these revocations. They, because of student privacy, wouldn't tell us anything about these students, if they'd left the country, if they've been deported, anything like that. And same for the College of Idaho, which is private, so they have even more ability to kind of shield that information. So all of those students had lost their visas, and then the Trump administration last Friday, so a week ago, really shifted their approach to terminating students' legal status after a wave of lawsuits and reinstated the majority of these visas. And so that doesn't mean that these students are going to be allowed to stay and finish what they're studying. The Trump administration has said that they're working on a new process to evaluate students' legal status. And then some of these revocations could be put back into place. We've really relied on the Inside Higher Ed analysis. They've been putting together kind of a database of these revocations and tracking them nationwide based on local reporting like ours.
Okay, appreciate that update, Emma. Kevin, a former BSU employee has filed a whistleblower lawsuit against the university, and there are some serious allegations in this. Tell us about this.
Yeah, serious allegations and some serious money. Lisa Gardner had been the executive director of alumni relations at the university. She was let go in December. She says that she was let go in retaliation for making whistleblower complaints about age discrimination at Boise State. Now, the lawsuit, and it was filed 2 weeks ago, the lawsuit, she is not claiming that she herself was a victim of age discrimination. She is saying that she advocated for female coworkers over the age of 40 who were being passed over for promotions. What the lawsuit contends is that some administrators at Boise State have passed over older female employees to give promotions to younger female employees. There's also an allegation that there was an improper sexual relationship between an administrator and a female worker who later received a promotion. Boise State isn't talking about the lawsuit. I've been checking to see if there are any filings from them at this point. The lawsuit is just in its infancy, but we're talking about what could be a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Gardner is claiming about $2.5 million worth of damages. So this could be another big lawsuit against Boise State. And, commenters were quick to say, wow, this sounds a little bit like the big city case. It's not exactly the same as big
Right.
city, but it is another potentially very high profile and very explosive lawsuit because these are some serious allegations.
Well, and Kevin, yes, it's not the same as the big city lawsuit. However, Boise State was found liable in that case, right? So they're
It's the
already
same university that is on the hook for several millions of dollars in the big city case. So this one will be watched very closely. We'll certainly be watching it closely.
Yeah, absolutely. George, we have got some breaking news coming out of Boise City Hall. Tell us about what you're just learning.
Indeed, it concerns what else? The pride flags flying outside Boise City Hall. And yeah, there have been so many stories about he said, she said, he being the Attorney General, Raul Labrador, she being the Mayor of Boise, Lauren McLean. But kudos to the journalists in our region who have been covering the detail and the nuance of House Bill 96. And yeah, it has created some division and even some confusion, but there is a lot of detail here, starting with the fact that there really hasn't been an enforcement on this House bill that says it restricts the flags that cities can fly, including the pride flag. And as we know, Boise Mayor Lauren McLean has said, guess what? That flag's staying up. Some people have tried to cover up the flag. The mayor's gone back out there and has taken some of that covering off to make sure that flag is flying. Well, just a little while ago, we learned that the Boise City Council this coming Tuesday will consider a new resolution confirming official city flags. The word being official, the resolution formalizing which flags are considered the, quote, official flags of our city. And what's really interesting about this announcement is that, get a load of this, the law team from Holland and Hart is volunteering to represent the city pro bono if any legal action is taken against the city on this matter. And I think that even a layperson can guess that, yeah, there's going to be legal action on this. So we'll look for this resolution come Tuesday evening. And then there's a team from Holland and Hart saying, yep, we've got your back on this and we'll take it all the way. We'll see how far it goes.
Well, and here's what's so interesting about this, George, is the lack of enforcement.
Right.
So here's this law that was passed, right? And yet you put a law in place and you seem to forget a very large portion of that, which is, okay, you can have a law, but if there's no enforcement, I mean, what are you going to do?
Right. And I think that that's the daylight that the mayor sees in that bill. Because there's no enforcement, she and the city council see that flag as a lawful expression of dedication to ensure, in their words, all members of our community feel seen, respected, and welcome. So again, they want to use the word official to consider this an official flag of our city. So, yeah, I think the daylight there is that there's no enforcement right now, so the legislature may come back and get enforcement. But in the meantime, the city wants to actually move the chess piece a little further and say, guess what? This is our official flag now.
So we will find out more come Tuesday evening,
Yeah.
George, correct?
Indeed.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate all of the reporting today. Thank you all for taking time with us today. We have been speaking with our Friday Reporter panelists, Kevin Richert, senior reporter and blogger with Idaho Education News, Emma Epperly with Idaho Ed News, Sarah Cutler, reporter with the Idaho Statesman, our very own George Prentice, and special thanks to ProPublica reporter Audrey Dutton, who joined us in the very first segment. You can find all of these stories online. We'll put links on our website as well, boisestatepublicradio.org. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.